So for part two of our project, we're going to start styling. Now, I actually spent a bit of time thinking about how I would approach this because I really watched how I took what we learned and how I struggled with remembering exactly how to style certain things based on what we've learned, right? So, I mean, at this point, right, I think we just finished, yeah, and in this case, I think we finished pseudo selectors, right? So there's just been so much content that has been covered. And so here's what I want us to do for part two is that I want you to style our pages. Okay, so at this point we should have the main index page, right, so if I was to move over, matter of fact, let me do this because I actually ended up, and this will be something that'll be kind of fun that we do. I just put together, an index to kind of show, and I'll make this more build out, but like here was the content for me from the first part one. And so here's the content now that I've styled almost all the index page. And it's been really good. But I can tell you at times it felt painful too. Because I was like, oh yeah, how do you do that? And so I think what I'm going to do is, in addition to this, I'm going to provide a little longer video for students who want it to show you basically how to use DevTools really to your advantage. Because if you understand how to use DevTools, and for those of you who are taking my programming class, or if you've taken 82, I know in 82 we could have even talked about it more. But the more you know how to use DevTools, the better and easier CSS can be, because you really start to kind of take, because really what we're doing here is we're taking your vision of your site, okay? And like, how do you want to lay it out? And part of it is just like, how do I take that content? And again, for me and for most of us, because I required that so many different levels for the outline based on the kind of content for that main page, it took a bit to style all that, but what that gave me was the basis now that I can take into my other pages. And I definitely still have work to do, but I have enough to give you how I want you to approach this. Okay, so here's what I want you to do, and this is really because what we'll do is using what we've learned in 1 through 13. So if we go back and look at 1 through 13, right? So we learned selectors, colors, units and sizes, box models, typography, styling links, list stylings. We did that little mini project, display. What was this one? Floats. Yeah, that's cool, right? Floats I definitely used. And then positioning. Can't see what that one was. Oh yeah, columns. Yeah, columns I definitely could still do. So when you get to 13, at the end of 13, that's all the stuff you can use and you need to use. Now I'm not specifying exactly how much of it to use, but I want you to, and you'll see how I'm going to grade this. And each student comes at it with a different understanding. Some of you have come in with some understanding of CSS. Some of you it's brand new, right? And so everybody's site's going to look different based on their knowledge. But I want to have seen you style, again, here's the key, everything on your pages. Everything needs to have a style applied. Now, does that mean if you apply a style at a higher level for every P, does that count? Not really, because even though you can do a base style there, you still want to have a specific style. And again, this is where it's kind of hard to specify, right? Because you want to be able to control through the cascade, and boy, that is the key to this, right? And the best practices that we've learned so far. Okay, so this is a little subjective. I'll know it when I see it. I'm going to show you again. I'll at least give you, and the reason I don't go into depth about what I did is that often, and I've seen this to be true, when I show students that's what they end up doing, and that's not the purpose of this work. Okay, but I definitely want to show you, give you an example, and again, I'll do a different video for that, for how to use the tools that we have available to us to make our lives easier. Now, the other thing is, can you use like ChatGPT? Absolutely you can, right? Just don't go beyond these requirements in here when you're trying to style something. You know, how do I do that kind of background, that I saw, that, and, in this case, I put a border on the bottom, right? And then I put the inline box on the menu. Now I got to still play my menu. It shouldn't jerk around like that. And then how did and these are floats. How do you do that, right? And then how do you create some space? These are big captions. How do I style those? I mean, it's just one of those things. You can definitely use other tools. You just don't, you want to be able to write and document your own CSS, okay? Okay, so your site does not need to be perfect, but it needs to show how well you can apply what we've learned. That's really where we're at. And again, I'm repeating something from up here, but don't use grid, flexbox, media queries, and other content after chapter 13. Yeah, points will be removed. Here's why, because that's going to be part 3. Part 3, then we'll go back, because once you see how to code things with what we've learned in here, right? It's like what I said on the week 2 group stuff. I wanted you to only use those things because it really makes you hone your skills in those areas before you start using things that just make life, it will feel like easier, but still having an understanding of those 1 to 13, those what I would call fundamental CSS skills. Because again, it took me a little time, but I enjoyed it. It was fun to do it. Okay, so now on your site, and I'll show you mine on the site.html, select your color palette we talked about, right? Cooler was one of those. If you need the link, shout out, I'll give it to you. Like, here's how I did that. And by the way, every page at the bottom, your footer, input your sitemap. So here was the color palette I chose. And I'm still figuring out how exactly I'm going to implement this. I created a class for these. That was totally fine. And then I'll end up putting the sitemap, because we're going to end up adding a few more pages through the process. Okay, so now here's the key. Commits and documentation will be how I grade this work, right? So here's what I look for in your commits. Commits show your progress in writing a CSS. Okay, for example, once you feel like you've achieved a specific style for something on your page, commit it, right? And that's why I'm looking for your progress, because I know sometimes it's easy to go out and find existing CSS and just throw it all in there, but it won't help you, okay? Because it's like using somebody else's work and not your own. And here's the other thing is documentation. I should reword this a little bit, as comments is including comments in your CSS. No, that's it. Documentation is including comments in your CSS about how that rule set is used in your design. Okay, so again, this does not have to be perfect. Where did I say that? It does not have to be perfect. It just has to show progress, and it shows you can write some CSS. You can just lay out a basic page with what you've learned. Okay, use short commit messages that tell me about the work, etc. Like here's an example. Get commit starting header styles, right? Or finishing heading styles, or something else, right? But I want to see it as a, as you're working through it, commit. The more commits show progress and process. Okay, so here's the deal. If I see, a good progression of commits and what you're doing, I can see your thought process. But if you get to the end and I see a complete thing, it's not going to help you. It will definitely hurt your grade, right? Okay, so here's the other thing. Submit early so you can get feedback. And if you need help, reach out to myself or Zach. If you don't know, if you haven't heard me say, in the syllabus is not only my office hours, which are definitely, I'd love to talk to students about this kind of stuff. So consider reaching out to me on my office hours, but here are Zach's office hours, and here's a way to get in touch with him, right? So reach out for help, right? Make sure you validate your HTML and CSS and submit your history, your commit history for P2 folder. So I know this is different than part one because I really did think about this. I really gave this because I know the more specific I am and creating boundaries and helping students understand what they need to do can feel easier. But at this point, because everybody's going to approach their designing of their page differently based on how well that chapter 1 through 13 came through for them. And again, by the way, this is where you lean into your notes. Or I definitely a couple times went back and watched. What was the thing I watched? Floats. I was trying to remember something on the floats, and I remembered, oh yeah, the best practice. And he went over the best practice here. And I ended up saying that in my instruction is like, your CSS needs to show your understanding of the cascade and follows best practices that we have learned so far. Okay? So, and follows the best practices we have learned so far. So I really did give these instructions thought because I wanted to give you a framework to work in for this. And again, I'm upfront and honest. This is the first time I've done this way. So there could be, and the other thing is by submitting early, you get feedback. So if you're submitting late, definitely I'll still give it to you, but you don't get the opportunity to fix it and get a better grade. Now, you'll need to fix it before the next step. So, the sooner the better. Okay. Thanks, and I'll talk to you soon.